So, welcome, Joachim.
Welcome, Rufus and Elisabeth. Nearly, yeah.
Nearly. So, welcome, everybody. I'm Rufus. I work as a psychologist in the British National Health Service, and I'm going to keep my job, apparently. And yeah, I'll just let other people introduce themselves.
Yeah, so my name is Elisabeth. I'm from Denmark. I've been in the UK for 9 years now. And I'm partly retired, partly self-employed, and I do things like organize training and set up or run supervision spaces for people who work in mental health.
And my name is Joachim. That's not how I say it in German, but that's how I say it in English. And I work both in a German mental health setting and also as a freelance trainer and researcher and supervisor, etc.
Yeah, we know each other through the Hearing Voices Network. And we're all quite passionate about therapeutic approaches to hearing voices, self-help approaches, and education around that.
Yes.
So, I recently made a film with another psychologist called Katrina Steele about vaccine mandates. We followed up talking with you about it. You were interested, and you've got a perspective as you commute to Germany from England.
Yeah, so I'm based in the UK. I do have a small base in Germany too, because I've got my regular work there too. But yeah, I'm based in the UK for family reasons, basically. As in, my wife is British and my son is half German, half British. So yeah.
So we thought it'd be really nice to share experiences and ideas. So yeah, tell us a bit more about your job and commute and how in these current times it's affected.
Yeah. So in non-COVID times, I would regularly be commuting to Germany, but also to Switzerland and to maybe Austria and other countries if they invite me to. And yeah, I would regularly travel to work in Germany for a few days normally, and obviously Trevor Dick did get affected through COVID and COVID regulations. And it became very clear very early on that if I wanted to travel in a non-complicated way or half non-complicated way during COVID, I basically needed to make sure that I would get a vaccination and show that I had a vaccination, because otherwise I might still have been able to travel, but it would have been very difficult to prove that I definitely still had the right to travel and that I didn't need to quarantine all the time, etc. Yeah. So that's the kind of general setup, I suppose.
I've noticed on Facebook you've been commenting about what it's like in Germany and how we're lucky in the UK.
Yeah, that's how I feel it's like. In terms of the COVID measures, yes. Is that an invitation for me to say a bit more about that? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I suppose I didn't really get overly involved in the whole COVID measures debate until maybe, say, early autumn, late summer, I would say. Maybe coinciding more or less with Freedom Day, as it was pronounced over here in the UK, and just noticing how things weren't happening in a similar way in Germany, and if anything, things seem to be getting more strict in terms of measures being rolled out, corona measures being rolled out. So I'd say the main difference in Germany, people were taking things very strictly and seriously. Not that they weren't over here, but it seemed to be at another level compared to what I was experiencing in the UK. So, for example, when I went shopping in Germany, I would notice the difference to how I went shopping here. Even though there was mask wearing mandate in both places at the time, if my mask happened to slip off the nose over here, no one would say anything. If it happened to slip off my nose in Germany, I could be rest assured that within a few seconds, often, at best maybe a minute or two, I'd have any member of the public, staff or anyone just come up to me and in no uncertain terms, with quite a strict tone of voice, say to me, mask up, but like an order. And it wasn't someone speaking to me politely. It was just quite clear, mask up. It felt a little bit like people felt entitled to just walk up to a complete stranger and tell them what to do. That I hadn't experienced in the same way. I'd experienced some of that over here, but not to the same degree over here. And in the UK, very quickly there was an exemption being made for people, for medical reasons. Some people were said not to be able to wear masks, and that was being announced in supermarkets and in public places everywhere, to be kind to each other and not to be disrespectful to each other. And remember that some people couldn't wear masks. And there didn't seem to be anything like that happening in Germany. There weren't any announcements being made. I believe people could have exemptions, but they were very difficult to get. And if people did have exemptions, then they would be checked whether these exemptions were definitely in order and correct, etc., including by members of staff from a shop. It just seemed at a whole different level, really. Yeah. So that was the initial thing I noticed. And then with the introduction of vaccinations, it seemed to become a whole different ball game, as in very quickly COVID passes saying were introduced. And initially they would say either, only people could go to this establishment or that establishment, to this shop or that a bar or restaurant, if they had either recovered formally and could prove it with a doctor's note, either recovered or vaccinated or had tested negatively on that very day. Normally on that very day, or normally it wasn't allowed to be much older than 24 hours, some initially maybe slightly older. And then very quickly after that, it became clear that in lots and lots of places, only people who were either recovered or vaccinated were allowed to go. And from autumn onwards of last year, 2021, a basic lockdown for unvaccinated people essentially happened across Germany. Essentially, people who weren't vaccinated weren't allowed to go anywhere, to any shops or anything like that anymore. And that's the case till today.
Wow.
So what do they do? What do you have to do?
They're allowed to go to, they're allowed to go outside. When I say lockdown, as in they're not allowed to go to shops. They are allowed to go to supermarkets. However, even that was briefly being doubted, that they would be allowed to go to supermarkets. And some states in Germany were briefly toying with the idea of even forbidding access to supermarkets for people who weren't vaccinated. That was overruled by some court, but it's not out of the picture. People continue to play with that idea, toy with that idea. And essentially it meant that people were entirely blocked out from social life everywhere, people who were unvaccinated, which at the point in autumn was maybe still a reasonably sizable proportion of the population, maybe around 25 to 30% of the adult population. Or that's another difficult thing. We do have very unclear numbers. Even though Germany is meant to have a reputation for being very exact and very good at recording things and noting things down, we do have very, very unreliable and probably very inaccurate numbers as well on lots of measures. So yeah. Anyway, so that was the basic setup that I noticed, and that made me feel quite uncomfortable. I mean, I was uncomfortable before with the measures that were happening both in the UK and in Germany and across the world. But given that these were things that seemed to be affecting everybody, I thought, okay, so we can somehow, that I don't necessarily agree with the degree that we've taken. However, if we're all having to go through it, then that I can kind of live with that. Not with wholehearted support, but certainly when we started differentiating between the unvaccinated and the vaccinated, that's when all my alarm bells just started going, and I started thinking, what is happening here? That's really not good, what we're doing, and particularly since it seemed to be being backed up with the rhetoric that was really hotting up in autumn of last year. It was really not good before, I would say. But the rhetoric in German politics appeared to be one that was very clearly and unashamedly blaming the unvaccinated for the ongoing persistence of the pandemic. Despite us already at that point knowing from the scientific papers that had looked at transmissibility of vaccinated and unvaccinated, we already knew that that wasn't the case. However, that didn't really seem to be of interest to any leading scientist that was advising the government, or even leading politicians, including our Chancellor Merkel at the time, our now new Chancellor. We had elections in, can't quite remember, but we had elections fairly recently, a few months ago. I felt the rhetoric was very much one of blaming unvaccinated for the ongoing pandemic, and with that also the fact that the reason why we still have to have all these measures in place is essentially because of all the unvaccinated, because they're keeping things going, so therefore they are to be blamed. And that really, really, really didn't sit comfortable with me at all, apart from the fact that even if scientifically they were right, it still wouldn't have sat comfortable with me, because I do firmly believe that, of course, we need to, in a democracy, make space for different takes on life and different convictions that people have, and not impose our own convictions on other people, not in the name of not in the name of saving lives or anything like that. So the rhetoric was one of unvaccinated people are not showing solidarity. They are basically crazy. There was a new term that started being used a lot. People were called Schwurblers, which is a term I hadn't heard before. I had to look it up, but essentially means people who talk rubbish, essentially. And it was used as a term to say they're essentially crazy and therefore not to be talked with, which I understand was happening here up to a point, but the degree to which it's been happening and is continuing to happen in Germany, I feel is at a whole different level. So I've been talking quite a lot now. I can say more, but that's my opening statement.
Yeah.
It's really interesting to listen to, because I don't know how it's been in Germany at all. I noticed that Germany was one of the few places where there were demonstrations early on.
Yes.
And I wondered what that was about, because that wasn't clear from any reporting that happened, that very early on there was some quite big opposition to the restrictions.
We're definitely very, very divided as a society now. That's my sense. And we, anecdotally, there's stories all the time of friendships falling apart, marriages falling apart, real schisms schisms, is that the word, in families between siblings, between married people, between parents and children. I mean, I know that happens here too, but it seems to be happening at another level. And yes, you're right, demonstrations were happening early on. And I have to say, I was quite pleased to see that, because I felt it was important that we don't just unquestioningly just take everything that we're being told to do, not when it comes to such a strict and far-ranging measures. But people demonstrating were very early on painted very quickly with a brush of, they were essentially conspirational, conspiracy theorists. And of course, you would always find, for the media, you would always find people who would actually serve, and serve that idea, and would come up with some microchip idea by Bill Gates and other things. But of course, that wasn't. Those people existed, but that wasn't the vast majority then. I firmly believe, and it certainly isn't now on any level. But the divide has got much worse, I would say. Our Chancellor denies it outright. He says there's no division happening in our society, and I don't know anyone who agrees with him. But he says there is no division.
So the remedial reporting I came across over here of those demonstrations, and the way it was dismissed was that these were a new merging of right wing and new age. So it was like these crazy right wing new age people. They're like extra crazy, because not only are they far right wing, they're also new age. Ironically,
in Germany, like in lots of other nations, it was the far right who, right from the word go, did criticize measures that were taking place and did say this isn't right, etc. So it was easy to then say it was primarily right-wing people, and of course, I'm sure some of them were part of that, no doubt. And yes, we do have. I would say not a small tradition of a fair bit of new age happening in Germany. So I suppose that goes into some of that similar way of thinking. But talking about media and how they would talk about it, I used to be a regular reader of a somewhat left of center news magazine called Der Spiegel, which is known to some people internationally too. It has a fairly good reputation, or used to have a fairly good reputation internationally. And that was my kind of go-to news magazine traditionally. And over time, during the pandemic, I just started thinking, I kept on thinking, is something, I don't know, is there something wrong with this magazine? I mean, like, what's happening? It just seemed to be, I couldn't quite understand what was happening. And I just thought, maybe I'm overlooking something. But suddenly it was clear that there was just a very one-sided way of portraying the whole way of doing things. And that was very much pro-government lockdown measure rules, and very much depicting people who weren't of the opinion that lockdown measures were right, were either crazy or irresponsible and didn't care whether people died, etc. And therefore crazy anyway, and we mustn't listen to them. And the more I looked around, the more I could not really find anyone saying anything else, until someone close to me pointed out there's one broadsheet newspaper that appears to want to try and at least do the usual thing of portraying at least two different points of view and maybe even more. Yeah. But there seemed to be one of the classic broadsheet papers only that was doing it. And I felt that was similar in the UK.
Yeah.
I was quite surprised that, where are all your questions? Asking, what is this based on, and what are the studies exactly saying, and where are the people asking, how did these initial studies take place, and what was the method, and how, are we asking questions about the fact that Pfizer was funding it? That's not automatically wrong. Pfizer funding it, fine, but surely we need proper oversight to then see how unbiased the results are, and whether it's whether there's anyone manipulating data or not, which is easily done.
We saw a shift. I think the first few months, BBC seemed a bit more balanced, and then seemed to become the mouthpiece for the government.
Yeah.
And I know that there was some Ofcom ruling that nobody could publish anything that didn't support government policy. And that became this dogma that we still have, really. And I think it's opening up a bit now. But yeah, it's been great. That's been quite, I mean, we didn't watch the news anyway, but it's been quite disturbing to turn on anything with the BBC and just get a one-sided view constantly. And it sort of makes you feel really unsafe, to have a one-side. It doesn't, I don't think it creates the kind of conformity and safety that it's meant to. I think it creates a lot of rebellion. I think people aren't silly, but yeah, that's been worrying. But it's nice living up north as well, because there seems to be more mistrust of authority, and people being willing to think for themselves, and
sort of subtle non-compliance.
Yeah.
So.
And do what? Sorry, what about compliance?
Subtle non-compliance.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And just for people watching who don't know, I'm not against vaccination. I think it could be really valuable for somebody who's got health vulnerabilities. What I do disagree with trying to vaccinate the whole population. I think that's a waste of resources, and I don't think it's a solution to the problem. But I think there's big political interest behind that, and I'd love to have seen that more debated in the media. There was an advert today in the Metro, full-page advert, saying government needs to respect informed consent, and it was a message to parents saying, look, these are the risks for children. They're negligible, really. So, but there are more risks to children if the child has a vaccine of myocarditis, and yes, those risks are small, but in Israel they're a lot bigger than what the government's predicting here. We'd really like you to, think about this before you decide to give your child a jab. And that was refreshing to see that, because there hasn't been enough of that kind of debate as.
Of course, proper informed consent, I feel that's my calling to say something about that. We know, of course, that proper voluntary informed consent goes back to my forefathers in particular, or the need for it as a result of what my forefathers did about 80 years ago. My understanding is that it was written in law as part of the Nuremberg Code as a direct result of the experimentation in the Nazi concentration camps on children and other people by Joseph Mengele, and I mean, Joseph Mengele was the most well-known doctor who did it, but he wasn't the only one by any stretch of the imagination. Of course, that was the precursor to the Helsinki Declaration, and what we understand today as the necessity of voluntary and informed consent. And informed, of course, does mean a proper information on pros and cons of what's available out there, rather than just very one-sided ways of presenting things. And that I found that to be very concerning all along too. Yeah.
And the Nazi thing has come up in Germany, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's come up in lots of different ways, basically. everyone is calling each other a Nazi in Germany at the moment. I mean, both sides are calling each other Nazis in a way, and of course, I mean, there's nothing worse that anyone can say in Germany than call each other Nazi, which that is reassuring. That's the worst thing that you can say in Germany. I find that reassuring. But with that, if you call someone a Nazi, it's equivalent to saying, don't listen to them, they are Nazi. Basically, whatever they have to say is invalid because they're Nazi. So yes, there has been a lot of Nazi calling of each other, both sides. I suppose people on the side who've been against the measures, and these are by no means only the unvaccinated, of course. It does include quite a lot of people like me, who, you know, I'm reluctantly vaccinated. I did it for purely selfish reason. Certainly didn't do it out of solidarity. My selfish reason was I wanted to have as unencumbered a life as I possibly could. And
were you vaccine hesitant? Were you hesitating before you had it?
I was hesitating, but yes, it's nice that you bring that nice term into play. Well, I said my own personal conviction was I really don't need it and I don't want it. That's what I said early on when they started talking about developing a vaccine. However, when it became clear that rules and regulations were going the way that actually you can't do anything unless you're vaccinated, then I said, all right, okay, I suppose it's actually important for me to also see if I can have an income and feed my family. So for me, it did actually feel like a mandate at that point already, even though it wasn't an official mandate. And because that was fairly early on in the pandemic, felt like if I would try to protest against it, the tide was even more against me at that point than it probably is now, I would say, because at that point people were just really happy to have the vaccine and, you know, maybe, you know, it's the way out into liberation and yeah. But as I said, formally I might have been able to still travel, but it would have become extremely difficult. I would have always had to show that my job was really needed, which wasn't, I really needed to be there in person and justify my traveling that way. I might have still needed to go into quarantine under certain circumstances. It would have become quite impossible, basically, to do my job properly. But I can't remember where I was going with this. Nazi calling.
Nazism.
Yeah, so I'm in fairly close contact with a fair few people who've decided not to be vaccinated in Germany, and I've been following the way they've been dealing with it, and I've been saying to them, well done, good job that you're doing it and that you're not being vaccinated. Thank you for doing this on behalf of the rest of us. Thank you for not agreeing. That's been my sense. So you can see where I've been on the side of the argument. And
need people like you.
Well, yeah, exactly. You know, I felt like it is far too one-sided what's happening here, and we definitely need people to protest and people to uphold their right to not go with what everyone else seems to be saying. So, but it's also meant that I've seen at very close hand how the pressure, societal pressure, has just grown onto them exponentially over time, more and more and more. I'm thinking of what one friend of mine, she was talking about just for more than a year now, getting a lot of pressure on a regular basis to be vaccinated. And it felt like bullying. It definitely felt like bullying. And she would often be asked whether she would essentially be asked to her face whether she was a bit too stupid to understand, you know, the importance of vaccination. Maybe she needed to be told how important it was, or maybe she had a bit of a fear of needles and therefore needed to be accompanied to, you know, to the whole thing. In her case, she had good medical reasons why she wasn't going to get vaccinated. She wasn't anti-vaccination, but she had very good medical reasons, which happened to not be on the official list of acceptable exceptions for why one shouldn't have a vaccination. But She was and is very worried. If she was to take the vaccination, it could potentially kill her, essentially. And that's not delusional. I knew of that medical condition way before we ever talked about COVID and any vaccination. So it's not a made up thing. So she's got very good reasons for that. But other people, they've got, they feel it goes completely against their own values. I'm thinking of one friend who, he's been one of those new age people, for example. He's been really into holistic ways of thinking, eating, living his life. So it goes completely against everything that he believes in. And he's been, he's been in close contact with vulnerable people and hasn't tested positive once. They've been very good at keeping, they haven't needed to use PPE, but at least masks, etc. Being very respectful of hygiene measures, etc. So I look at these people, and because we're talking together, because we're talking on the back of the vaccine mandate, which now looks hopeful that it's being overturned in the UK. But it was also decided in mid-December in Germany for health and social care professions, anyone working in health or social care settings. And I feel that these people are essentially asked to choose between pest and cholera. That's how it feels to me. And therefore, it's not a real choice. And I do feel, because we're making it such, there's exceptions, medical, you can get a medical exemption, but as I said, the medical exemptions are very closely defined, and you hardly get any doctor being willing to do it, because you hear anecdotally that some doctors who've resisted measures and the calls for vaccinations, etc., have already been sacked from places, lost their license, all sorts of things like that. Those kind of things are going round. So there's a real fear amongst lots of medical professions. One high up medic in Germany is very pro-vaccination, pro-measures against the unvaccinated, and he's been speaking of the tyranny of the unvaccinated, against the vaccinated. So he's been very polarizing, and all of that amounts to, as I said, I feel a choice between pest and cholera, and I do feel if we're allowing that to happen without saying anything against that, then we're part of that. Which is why I feel I want to be speaking out against it. If we're not speaking out against that, I feel it's traumatizing to people being in that position, because it is the people who haven't been vaccinated so far, it's been a really choice of conviction. So to say to them, you can choose to go completely against what you believe in, or you can find yourself on the streets. But the choice is yours. That's no choice, and that's I would say a traumatizing assault, because it goes against existential. What's existential for people? What
do you mean about pests and cholera?
Well, the choice in Danish as well.
All right.
Is it only a German expression?
No, we've got in Danish as well. As well, so we say.
Is it not? Is it not a British expression then? Clearly, no. Okay. So the expression means that essentially what I just said. People are not really being given a choice. They're being given a choice between two really bad things, which isn't really a choice. Okay. You can choose to either have pest as in the plague. Or cholera. That's the choice that we give to you. The choice that people would like to have, which is, I might just like to maybe just have, just carry on as I was. Yeah. That's not a choice. It's not a choice that's being given. So I do feel that's
a treatment you don't want, or no job. Yeah.
Yeah, and the treatment you don't want, not just because because people will just say to people, "Oh, it's just a little, it's just a little prick in your arm, and you're fine." But of course, it isn't that. For people, it goes completely against their convictions or against their fears. So it is like forced treatment, if they do it.
Yeah.
You've been told a fair few times that you should drop your principles. So it's similar to, you're talking about conviction.
Yeah.
And some people say, well, principles are not as important as ethics, informed consent, principles, convictions. These things are not as important as saving lives by having this injection.
Yes.
Although the people, I guess I was being advised, keep your job, don't put your principles first. Yeah. My dad said that. Some things you just got to go with. That's life. And I get that, but we do have to go along with some things we don't agree with. But this feels like a slippery slope. And for me, I do feel torn about travel because my parents are getting old, and I'd like to help them go to France at least one more time. And to do that without a vaccine passport is looking difficult at the moment. There probably is a way. But yeah, I might do it for them. I wouldn't do it for the job.
Like for me, not being vaccinated is like personal beliefs. It's about ethics. It's about social principles. And it's also about my personal physical health, because I, similarly to the person you described, Joachim, I'm pretty sure that if I had those injections, my chances of something not very good happening are probably 50-50, which is a lot worse.
Yes.
Which is a lot worse than what I think my chances. I early on thought that I had chances of getting quite severely ill with COVID if I caught it. Because I have chronic fatigue and chronic pain, and I early on heard about long COVID because I was connected into chronic fatigue circles where it clearly became, that people already knew about post-viral syndromes, so there was knowledge around that. So I was quite early on scared of getting COVID and was worried that I could get severely ill, I could have long-term problems and my fatigue could be worse, and I was just like, oh, this is really scary. But as time went on and I got a greater sense of how it affected people in different age groups and in different with different vulnerabilities, I felt more sure that my body would be okay with dealing with it. Whereas with the vaccines, I feel quite sure that it's a lot greater risk for me personally, for my body. The way my body tends to respond to any kind of medical intervention, really. Like I'm highly sensitive to any kind of meds I take, whether they're antibiotics or psychiatric meds I've used over the years, or basic painkillers. I have to use very low dose. So I'm hypersensitive, and I'm pretty sure that I would have, about 50-50 chance of having a bad reaction to a vaccine. So for me, it's a very, we're a bit different that way. Our choice around it, you feel more comfortable having a vaccine if you have to.
Yeah, I don't like being told what to do, and I don't like being forced things. So yeah, but it does activate me, as I talked about in the previous film. I feel very passionately about. I don't trust big pharma. I don't trust big government. And we worked in the mental health system. We see how it works, how things are exaggerated, drugs are exaggerated, their benefits, and the problems are completely downplayed, and everyone turns the other way and pretends they're not serious and life-threatening.
And also people who say that they're adversely affected by anything, they were crazy in the first place.
Exactly.
Any adverse reaction they describe is just part of their craziness. It just becomes like a mind game.
I know, and that was just about what I was just going to say. To me, the similarities between what I've been trying to work towards changing in the psychiatric system and how things seem to be operating here seem to be so stark, so really striking.
It feels like we've got a lot of skills to offer people to think about this because of our work trying to, bring in informed decision making in mental health care, bring in collaborative approaches, embrace different worldviews, build bridges with hostile voices, and feels like we can offer something which is exciting, but it's also very dispiriting to see all that risk averseness we've been struggling with in the mental health system coming in a strong way into society. People, I once worked with a psychiatrist who wanted to stop somebody I was supporting babysitting his nephew and niece, and because he punched a wall, at home one night. And she said, we've got to think back from the inquiry. So let's imagine the worst case scenario, because he can hit a wall. Maybe he can hit his nephew and niece, even though he's a really loving, gentle guy with children. But, he's got mental health diagnosis. So imagine the headlines. How would that affect my career? Okay, let's prevent that. Let's stop him babysitting. Let's just break down that family's, support networks. And that's what I see here now. It's like, okay, what's the worst case scenario? Okay, let's stop everyone working or talking, meeting up with each other. Seems like we've gone too far in terms of trying to control something.
Well, I've always thought that for us who were trying to create some change within psychiatry, that the reason why that's so hard is because society basically approves of psychiatric force and psychiatric suppression of strangeness, violence, aggression, different beliefs, that psychiatry is this kind of protective barrier against all the things we don't like. And society is, and society as a whole, I'm not saying that everybody thinks like this, but there's a general sense that it's easier to rely on professionals and quick fixes than it is to sort things out between ourselves through talking and supporting, the hard way, basically, the slow, hard way. So kind of happy to hand over that power to psychiatry. So one of the reasons why psychiatry can't change is because society approves of medical quick fixes. Whether they're reality, those medical quick fixes, is not, doesn't really play into that. It's the hope that a pill will sort this out, an injection will sort this out, and
just do what the experts tell you and then it'll be fine.
Yes, and professionals will sort it out for us. We don't have to think too much about consequences or long-term scenarios. But yeah, it's a strange kind of time. When I heard the narrative that the only way out of this is vaccinations, because that started already in spring 2020. That was what we were being told. We need strict measures and lockdowns until there's a vaccination. Vaccination is the only way out of this. So there was no talk of sort of like, in what other ways can we deal with this illness? In what other ways can we prevent it? In what other ways can we treat it so that people don't get so ill? If people get severely ill, what are, and there was no sort of like okay, people get ill and die. That was not a narrative either. You know, that honesty, that this is, you know, when there is severe illness, people get ill and die, and it's painful, and how can we face that pain together? Nobody said that. No leaders came out and said, okay, this is going to be shitty, it's going to be painful, people are going to die, we're going to be grieving, and how do we face this together and care about each other through that? Like there was just like, no, we need to control it, control ourselves, control our bodies, stop breathing on each other, stop talking, and wait for the vaccine. And of course, then when the vaccine came, it was like, oh my God, what a relief. Now we can, you know, let go of some of that control. And then that was not the reality. And like you say, what has happened in Germany is that then the blame goes to the unvaccinated. And yeah, I was just very aware of all these narratives and all this rhetoric really early on, and was really frightened by it. And became very frightened of the vaccine passport idea because it was already being talked about. And I was like, oh, the vaccine passport, that really freaks me out. The idea of a health certificate to gain access to, but also just what it says about, you know, that you are unclean, can't.
You are unclean. That it's exactly that kind of language, isn't it? Especially for people who are on the receiving end. Yeah. I just, is it okay? I mean, sorry, am I interrupting you, or is it okay to say something? I just want to second those 2 points. I want to take up the stuff about, you know, society being okay with what we do in psychiatry. That's something very familiar for me as well, and I would absolutely second that. That's been something that's become very clear to me fairly early on in my, you know, fairly, well, longish career now in psychiatry. That as soon as I started changing sides, if you like, and didn't just go with what people generally believed in psychiatry, as soon as I was trying to change something, I suddenly had a massive reaction against me, like a massive one, by all sorts of people who didn't want these things to be questioned, both psychiatric professionals, but also people around psychiatry, parts of society, etc. And it felt to me like I was suddenly facing a totalitarian system. That's how it felt to me, as someone trying to change things. And I don't feel like people were setting out to try and be totalitarian. I think that's just what seemed to happen as a response. And I spoke to someone fairly high ranking, so to say, I really disagree with the pending vaccine mandate. Been saying to him, you know, isn't that something that we can protest against in case you want to protest? I didn't know whether he wanted to. And I brought up the fact that some people who are unvaccinated really do feel treated. It feels to them like it's Nazi methods they're experiencing, being segregated. You know, they're not clean. They haven't got the party passport. You know, are you in the party? You know, it feels a bit like that. And I said I can absolutely understand them, and he dismissed that. I feel I can say this because I've experienced this myself. I don't experience it right now, because, you know, I've got vaccinated, so I'm not experiencing all those things pushing down on me, and, you know, all the segregation that my colleagues in Germany are experiencing. But you can't say that that's not what it's like for them, because that is what it's like for them. And who are we to say that's not what it's like? And that is, of course, very familiar to what we do with people in psychiatry. We just other them. We don't take what they have to say seriously anymore, because it doesn't go with what we intend for them. And I believe that all these high-ranking people, they don't want to really just be nasty to people who are unvaccinated. Yeah. I'm sure they do it with the very best intentions. I've got no doubt about it. In the same way that us as professionals in psychiatry have the very best intentions, but we all know the phrase about best intentions. And the other point that I also want to second to what you said is, I wanted to have the discussion about, hang on a minute, have we only just discovered that we might die at some point? That's the discussion that I also wanted to have during the COVID, when it started. Similar to what you were saying, I was thinking, why are we suddenly so worried about dying? Isn't that something that was going to happen anyway? And yes, we're allowed to be afraid of it, but surely then let's talk about our fears of dying rather than just saying we mustn't ever talk about it's absolutely unacceptable that anyone should die, even though we've accepted it on so many other levels before. But suddenly it's unacceptable that anyone should die. And I understand that because it's fear, it's something new, and we don't want to die a horrible death. But we can die lots of other horrible deaths from lots of other ways of, of illness or anything like that. Anyway, I'm aware that I'm honouring my surname, which in German could translate as talks a lot of rubbish, a mountain full of rubbish. So,
talking mountain.
Yes. A rubbish talking mountain, yes.
Is it?
Yeah.
Somebody sent a rap about the government mandate, and it was, it had anger in it. It was somebody very street, very cool, doing a rap against the government. And, it was this kind of righteous anger, instead of no jab, no job, it should be no job, no peace, you say. He said it 3 times. And in this sense, you're gonna fight for our rights. And I felt all this rage to health leaders and psychology leaders and academics who are just looking the other way or supporting it. It feels like most authority figures in mental health are supportive. People have found it. I've had reports of people saying, thank you for speaking up about it because people respect you, and then they think I'm less mad, because they say, oh, Rufus May has taken a similar position. But that shows that very few people feel able to speak up, even though, there's probably 20% of people at least questioning this in these fields, probably across society, at least 20%. But then I met this rage coming back at me, so I feel this really, rage, and I want to, stop being a hypocrite, but I'm also trying to do all the dialogue thing, so that's just part of me. But then I got this rage back, like a similar rage in some ways, the rage of powerlessness, that I can't stop all these decisions going on that restrict my freedom and people I care about's freedom, and medicalization of health, which I'm deeply suspicious of, seeing what's the next drug everyone's going to be encouraged to have, imagine it's going off on an aside, but imagine if there was a pandemic of voice hearing. Suddenly we all heard voices. The government, what would the government do? It would mandate antipsychotic medication for everybody.
No, by that time we will have helped people to understand what a brilliant gift voice hearing can also be.
Don't you believe it?
I am very confident. I'm very confident.
We'd all be,
injected
on depots, and there'd be this resistance movement again. So this rage, and it's like, how can we connect across it? Because I don't want to talk to people who don't hold the same view as me, but actually we've got emotional reasons. You've got your friend's experience, of discrimination and her fear of death, and that it's really emotional. And you've got your experiences, I've got mine, and then people on the other side, they've got theirs, and they're like, Rufus, you're setting a bad example. You're you could kill people with your example. People might not have the jab when they see you talking about choice. And this is how we connect with that. I think that all this splitting the government's doing is stopping us having those conversations with people who are terrified of death, and how can we hear their pain, you know?
Terrified of loss and illness, and the powerlessness of illness when you are severely ill or chronically ill is extremely devastating, you know, on so many levels. And just the fear of, if you're already chronically ill, you know, COVID presents a real risk of, you know, everything getting worse than it already is. You know, it's just like, how can you even breathe in that? You know, somebody who's chronically ill or somebody who's at risk of getting chronically ill. It's just, you know, but because, like you said, because of the division and the rhetoric, we struggle even more than we normally would to talk about these really difficult things and these really personal, highly emotional, issues. And also, if people have adverse reactions to vaccinations, that gets like, you know, you can't, speaking up about that, you get shamed because you're just putting you're creating hesitancy. You shouldn't be saying that you've had adverse reactions because that's going to put people off, you know. So you shouldn't be sharing that. So it's like, where do those people go, you know? Where do you go? And if you're somebody from an ethnic minority background who's already experiencing discrimination, you then choose not to get vaccinated, then you know, like, I feel, I guess sometimes I think, I don't know how that is, you know, like, well, because you know someone who said, well, it just feels like more of the same. Whereas
I kind of slowly learning that at work now, people who are vaccinated in unclinical areas don't have to wear masks, but people who are unvaccinated have to wear masks. So this happened a few months ago, and I felt really angry about it. And now I sort of wear my mask as a badge of pride. You know? It's like you have to find ways to just not take it too seriously. It is what it is, and it's ridiculous. But to reclaim it in a way rather than, we need each other for that. I feel a lot stronger having campaigned against the mandate, and then I've got into WhatsApp groups and you know, conversations like this. I feel a lot more like I can do it. I can take a different stance.
And I guess that, again, a sort of parallel with mental health is that that's what we've experienced as well, that when you do put your head above the parapet and you speak out, there is, you know, you become a target, you know, for people who don't agree with you, and you have to find ways to navigate that. But it's also, there is a sense of liberation, and not only for yourself, but for people who cannot or don't feel able to put their head above the parapet. So you kind of become these kind of this
conduit.
And there's something
which is a privilege. Because I'm privileged, because I've got power, I can put my head above the parapet and probably get less attacks. You know?
Absolutely, and I feel very privileged. It doesn't mean, you know, if I speak out too much at work, I may well run the risk of, even if they don't sack me, they may still decide that actually I'm a person of no interest anymore to them. That may also be the case. They may treat me differently. I don't know this yet. I mean, they've been treating me very well so far, just to say, and I'm not saying that they will treat me differently, but just to say that's of course a theoretical possibility I have to deal with. But I'm also aware that I feel much more privileged than lots of other people to be able to even speak up. I agree with that. But also, I mean, I feel, for me, for me, the biggest damage that I see, or the biggest challenge that I see, is how can we find a way to continue to talk to each other, which is what we've been touching on. How can we bridge the gap without accusing each other of being murderers, asocial, whatever you want to
control freaks.
Control freaks, whatever you want to, whatever we want to call each other. I feel like for all of us, of course, we have all our, as we said at the beginning, we all have our own reasons why we chose to do what we chose to do. And for all of us, they are very, normally very important reasons, which is also why I can understand the strength of feeling on both sides. And I do feel, though, that what we could offer in theory from our mental health background is understanding that it is possible to work and to talk to each other even when we have completely wholly different worldviews and ways of talking or expressing each other. We don't therefore have to call each other mad, which is what's happening right now. And of course, that's exactly what we've been campaigning against in our mental health work. We've been saying, by calling each other mad, or by calling certain people mad, and therefore dismissing anything they have to say, we're no longer listening to the very valid reasons they've got for saying what they've got to say. And that is very divisive and very actively, I feel, damaging to each other. And we happen to now speak from a position of being in the minority with our views, it seems. Yeah. And therefore we feel we're getting it more in the neck. But I don't think it's any good us just saying all the others are wrong, because of course, so we have to find a way of talking to each other. And I do feel that's the bigger challenge, but I do also get the impression there's no discourse of that happening, that we do need to find a way of talking to each other. It seems to just continue to be who's right and who's not. I'm following a lot of Twitter stuff in Germany too. And the language is unbelievable. The way that people are slated for having different views on both sides, of course, on both sides.
Yeah. Like when talk to them about getting vaccinated, they say, I don't know why I did it. They say, I did it so that things could go back to normal. I did it because I wanted to travel. I did it because of pressure from family who feel vulnerable. I did it because of pressure from friends, from colleagues at work. So there's very few people I talk to, and that might be because I'm open about being unvaccinated. There's very few people I talk to who say, I got vaccinated because I know it will protect me from illness, and it will stop the virus, and it will end COVID, you know. So I find it really interesting that that's not getting talked about either. That I think there's a majority of people probably, I think there might be, the majority of people have not had these vaccinations, these injections, for the reasons that we've been told that you should have it.
Yeah.
But that doesn't get talked about either,
And of course, the other thing that we don't routinely talk about, and less so even I would say in Germany, is all the social and economic consequences, etc. I mean, there were professionals, experts warning, both in Germany and in the UK, right from the start, domestic violence is going to go up if we do these lockdowns, etc. And that's what people were saying very loudly and plainly. We did things anyway. We didn't talk about that fact. And then we now have statistics about domestic violence going up. And again, that's something that we haven't discussed those things, and understand why that doesn't happen initially, particularly because you've got a big panic for everyone, so you want easy answers. But we're 2 years into the pandemic now. I think we're allowed to now have slightly more complicated questions and complicated answers as well.
Can I say something? Because all of this sort of reminds me of something I thought of really early on, is the humility to admit that we don't know anything.
Yeah.
But I can understand the desire to reach for data and for facts and for stats and for clarity and certainty and focus and gives us a direction and collective the sense that we collectively have decided this is the right thing to do, this is the way we're going. And I get that admitting that we don't know anything is pretty overwhelming, exhausting, frustrating. But I think the reality is that we don't know very much. We might not know anything, but we don't know very much. And what we do know is our personal stories and how these 2 years have affected us personally, each of us. Also stories of uncertainty, loss of job, poverty, domestic violence, not having to teach your child from home at home while you're trying to work, and maybe have a difficult relationship with your partner, or there's so many stories from these last 2 years, and nobody can get heard because we're so angry with each other and so overwhelmed. And I just think that's so sad. And where do we start with that? How are we going to get through this if we don't talk, even if it's uncomfortable talking?
Somebody told me today that their mother said that she felt like she was in a coffin in lockdown, and Zoom was her window. She could see her grandchildren on the other side of this window, so it gave her a little bit of sustenance while she was in this coffin. And it's like, yeah, we need to tell those stories. And I guess I'm encouraged by people creating their own media, because the media isn't telling those stories.
We kind of have to let go whether we're vaccinated or not, and whether that's the right thing or not, in order to be able to hear each other, I think.
Yeah, that's been my point. It's not good when we don't talk to each other, when we don't hear each other. That's so very painful, and the most painful, I think, in mental health as well, but also in life in general. When I don't feel heard, and when I feel dismissed, I feel probably that's one of the most devaluing things that can happen for me. I haven't experienced much shit in my life, so that's as bad as it gets for me.
Yeah, we don't want to get into you can go to meetings where I'm sure there are meetings where people will talk about anti-vaxxers, but I've been to meetings where people talk about we're the awake ones, and that's just as problematic. Surely the government kind of wants that. Wants people in their little groups fighting each other.
You think they want it, or they don't want it?
Yeah, divide and rule. The government wants people in their little factions, attacking each other.
I'm not sure about that the government wants that consciously. I don't think.
Divide and rule? It's an old colonial trick.
I know, but I don't know that people are so consciously using it as.
So why would journalists and why would Macron say, I really want to piss the unvaccinated off, and why would...
Good point. Good point.
Trudeau say similar stuff. They're all racist and sexist.
And of course, and all the German politicians too, or a lot of German politicians.
There's a tribal side to us, and when we're in power as well, it is a way to deflect and distract and
I agree with that. What I was probably disagreeing with was that it was necessarily a very conscious way that people just wanted us to war amongst ourselves. I think yes, they may. I don't think it's quite as conscious. That's my sense.
Right.
Certainly in Germany, it feels like people have just got so leading politicians have just got so taken up by their own fear that they don't seem to be able to come out of their fear bubble. That's how it comes across to me. Like they can't really think anything else, and I don't feel it's.
You don't think it's strategic?
Yeah,
I'm saying strategic, not exactly. Consciously strategic.
Yeah.
And I'm saying that because, of course, I've had all sorts of things thrown at me, both in personal and professional relationships, in terms of my own possible intentions that I might have, power hungry and all sorts, or you're just doing that to keep me down or do this, when there's been criticism. And I would say, I absolutely believe that that's how you experience it, but I'm not sure that I so very consciously thought it through. And I'm not saying that my behavior isn't something that didn't contribute to it. I'm sure it did, but it doesn't mean that I very consciously just went like that. And I got the sense that basically there was also just a lot of fear for leaders, that they didn't know what else to do but panic, essentially.
I think the divide and rule thing, comes from, there's a kind of evangelical belief that science is right, that vaccination and lockdowns are right. The way, certain measures are the right way, and then people who oppose them need to be described as having, talking mumbo jumbo. That's what Boris Johnson said. That media journalist the other day, apparently she's been complained about, when she said we need to turn people into social pariahs, turn the people who don't want vaccinations into social pariahs. It feels like it's been encouraged from the top, this polarization that we got with Brexit as well, and that we need leaders to model dialogue, not polarization, not otherization.
That's a big ask.
And they consciously have a choice. Surely they may do it unconsciously, but
I know, I do. Yeah, I do agree. They have a choice. Sorry.
Yeah. This is how politics have been run for I don't know how long. It's not just before Brexit or for 20 years. It's been terrorism and Islam. That's been painted as politics thrive on enemy images.
Well, that's what I was trying to say.
We get socialized into believing in tribes and enemy images. But I don't.
How can we rise above it? I guess.
I don't know if we can ask leaders who are socialized, who are sort of.
Well, that's what I was saying. I'm just trying to defend the divide and rule thing. But anyway, building bridges is what we're going to do, and you can't wait around for Boris and Keir to do it.
No, exactly. And I would also want to add, yes, the media has been very one-sided for a long time, but I would also say my basic sense on blaming the media is always the media gives us what we want to hear. If we don't want to hear it anymore, they will give us something else.
That's why I'm excited about people creating their own media, like we're doing now.
Yeah. With all the stuff that we've been saying hasn't been going right, some things that leave me with hope and make me a bit jealous about being so much in the UK is that for a few months now, we've had a tradition rise up in Germany of going for a walk on a Monday evening, because a lot of COVID measures, demonstrations have been either forbidden or not been granted in the first place when permission was sought. People just decided to start going for a walk. I'm just going for a walk on a Monday evening, and they gather together, and just lots of people happen to go for a walk. That's what it's known as. Spaziergänge is what they're known as. So, and essentially, it is a gathering of people who are critical of measures, and it is right across the board. Of course, people who are both vaccinated and unvaccinated, probably particularly unvaccinated, but also quite a few vaccinated people who are saying, we've had enough of all this divide and rule and all these measures, and something needs to change. And although they're not tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands people gathering in one place, they're happening all over Germany, in little places and even small towns, and in bigger places like Berlin, but all across they're happening, and they seem to be growing. And that's disconcerting to leading politicians. They're starting to say, you know, they've lost their innocence, these walks, and they shouldn't be happening. And police sometimes intervene and interfere and become violent, and that's not good, of course. And of course, they're all right wing. However, you know, in the mind of leading politicians in Germany, however, it appears that more and more people are expressing their discontent with what's happening, and also with the rhetoric by turning up to these Monday evening walks in the local area, which I think is a very beautiful thing. And I was recently shown some footage from Berlin, was sent some footage, and it was very peaceful, just a very lovely scene. People just walking the streets saying, not with us, you know, not you know, over our dead bodies, as it were, demonstrating against the measures and also against the mandate. We're still debating a general mandate of vaccination, as you may be aware, in Germany. So there's still lots to be for people to be concerned about, essentially. But I do feel that's a hopeful way of doing things, and the mentality of a lot of these walks, because I know quite a few people who go to these walks, appears to be one of very peaceful natured, a very peaceful natured event. Normally, people very keen to connect with each other, respect each other. Yeah.
On that optimistic note.
Isn't that a good way to finish? Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Yes, maybe we should go for a walk now. We do that.
A Wednesday evening walk.